So apparently, I got tapped to be the moderator of this particular panel on fandom, and I was thinking to myself, why would I have been tagged to do this? I do know that I'm a big fan of certain things. For those of you who've had me in class before, you know that I'm a particular fan of a particular author who I did my dissertation on. Who is it, guys? Yeah, I am. I really am. So I'm a big fan of him. I hope I don't alienate anybody by telling you that I grew up in New York, and I was a military family. My dad, Dr. Bruce Bell, who's in the, he's an Associate Dean of College General Studies. He was in the military station at West Point, Military Academy, and so we were pretty close to New York City, and at the time in which I was growing up, I call them my wonder years, my high school years, we were able to take the train into New York City and actually go for free to Yankee Stadium to watch baseball games if we just showed our military ID card, which is amazing. So I became, sorry people, a huge Yankees fan when I was growing up. Sorry if that alienates anybody, for any Red Sox fans or pretty much anyone who's not a Yankees fan. But I'm very excited that they won last night, the first wild card game. Again, hold your anger till later. So I'm a big fan of the Yankees. I was tapped to be the moderator of this panel, and I think it's really interesting, even the name moderator, because you know that fans and fan bases can tend to get a little bit hostile towards opposing fan bases. So I'm thinking to myself, is this going to turn into an episode of Jerry Springer, where I literally have to moderate and temper passions from our wonderful presenters and panelists right now? Probably. Probably that's going to happen. So let me introduce you to them before we get into our discussion. We have, a lot of you guys already know these people anyway, but we have the esteemed Dr. Mary Beth Baggett right here. And then we have Ms. Corey Hayes. Oh yeah, she got married. Don't be angry with me. Yay! Congratulations. And then we have Ms. Caitlin Elliott Sweat. She got married too. Yay! All right, and we have the esteemed Andy Thigpen over here, graduate student.
Not married.
Yeah! We have, and you're a fan of Batman, right?
I am.
All right. And then we have Dr. Tess Stockslager, who did so much in the coordination for this. And then we have Ms. Kari Willen. And she likes Buffy, the Vampire Slayer. All right. So with that being said, let's launch into our questions, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end too if you guys have any questions of the panelists yourselves. So let's start off with some personal questions.
Oh God.
What is your favorite color? No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to ask
Blue,
that.
no yellow.
What? All right. So obviously, since you're on this panel, you sort of define yourself as fans. I've already sort of given it away, let the cat out of the bag, as it were, for some of you. So how do you individually define yourself as fans of something or someone or work of literature or art or whatever? Yeah, just show of hands or raise the microphone if you're ready to talk.
Am I supposed to go first?
Go ahead.
Oh. Okay, let's go in order. That's easier.
So I think I was sort of I'm not exactly sure how I got on the panel. I showed enthusiasm for the panel, which I'm really excited about it. But I am a fan of Vonnegut, so I guess I will be here representative. When I was going through the question, I was like, oh, I actually have answers to these. So I'll be talking about my fanaticism of Kurt Vonnegut.
I'm sort of a combination of a very shallow fan of a lot of things, but then I'm a deep fan of one thing. I'm a shallow fan of Supernatural, Doctor Who, superhero fandom. I love Welcome to Night Vale. It's fantastic. The only fandom that I would officially be a member of is the Sherlock fandom.
Sherlock fandom.
I did my master's thesis on Sherlock Holmes as a character, and so I have a lot of various studies that I've done in that area. So that is my love.
Corey, let me interrupt for a second. Are you also a fan of the gospel?
I'm a devoted follower of the gospel.
Jesus juke. All right, next for Kit.
Okay, so when we were planning all of this, I immediately thought of myself as a fan of Lord of the Rings. I appreciate the applause. Yes. So, Lord of the Rings for sure. As far as participatory fandom is concerned, this is ended now because the show ended, but the television show Lost. I would still consider myself part of that fandom. And also Welcome to Night Vale. And then I'm sure there are other things that I can't think of. But yeah, that's basically it. So.
As previously mentioned, I am a Batman fan. Specifically, I'm also a DC Comics fan in general. I'm also a Doctor Who fan and a Star Wars fan.
Well, I think there's such a thing as a fan personality, a person who tends to latch onto things and be very vocal and enthusiastic about what they love, and I think that I have that. People know that I'm a fan of a variety of things, from The Godfather to the Pittsburgh Steelers to Loki, etc. But the main thing, I think, Carrie and I were just talking before the panel started, I think to be a true fan, maybe we can disagree on this, but you have to have a certain level of expertise about something, and so the one thing that I really am, I think I could call myself a card-carrying fan, and maybe, yes, I could call myself an expert on this too, is Harry Potter. So,
Charles Dickens.
And Charles Dickens, yeah.
I'm a fan of a lot of different things, like multiple people said, Harry Potter, Star Wars, things like that, but I'm definitely, like, I'm a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I would say I'm about an expert in that. I'm writing my thesis on that right now.
Good. All right, guys, I've got a follow-up question about this whole idea of kind of the personal questions of defining oneself as a fan. At what point did you all determine, hey, you know what, I'm a fan of Doctor Who, or I'm a fan of Batman and DC Comics, or I'm a fan of this particular author? Was there a moment, like a, let's call it a Joycean epiphany, as it were, for all you English majors out there? All right.
For me, I started watching Buffy, and as I was watching the show, I think I watched it through one time, and I started it again, and I decided that I was seeing themes in it that I wasn't really sure about, so I started researching the author, or the creator, Joss Whedon, and I started researching the themes behind it and what different people had to say about what was being portrayed within the show. And after that, I just kind of started getting into discussions about it and reading what other people had to say, and I've gone to Comic-Con to meet and discuss things about this as well. So at that point, I think I decided that I was like, that I was a fan.
there's kind of a truism that people who become saved later in life are maybe more enthusiastic about sharing their faith than people who were saved as children. Not always true. But I think I have a similar story about Harry Potter.
Are you comparing Harry Potter to the Gospel?
No, I'm not. I'm comparing my story. I was actually sort of antagonistic towards Harry Potter until after grad school. And in the summer of 2009, and I even have a conversion experience. My mom was the evangelist who led me to Harry. And it just happened really quickly, and I fell very hard in love with Harry Potter in the summer of 2009.
Dr. Stockslayer, kind of, for a second, did
yes.
she introduce you then to the 4 spiritual laws of Muggledom?
She
magic?
took me down the Romans road. So yeah, it happened. Yeah, it happened very quickly, and we can talk more about that later. Anyway.
For me, my fandom of DC Comics started when I was about 5, I guess. I remember watching a recording from television of the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons from the 40s. I have the first episode somewhere on VHS from my mom recorded, and I got hooked then, and then I watched the 1966 Batman TV series with my dad, because he watched it with his dad, and sort of like a multi-generational, I'm a 3rd-generation Batman fan, and so that's when I got hooked, and then Star Wars came later, and then Doctor Who even later than that, when I was in college, so that's my conversion story.
So, I'll just narrow it down specifically to the show Lost for me, which when that started in 2004, my family was still recording the episodes to watch later on VHS cassettes, because that's how old I am. So, we were recording it on VHS, and so we would watch them, we would rewatch them, and I remember, I guess the defining moment in that for me was, yes, partway through, one of the first big things that happens is, if you've seen the show before, I'm going to explain it. If not, I don't know. So when the hatch, the numbers count down and the hatch explodes, and then there's all these hieroglyphics and symbols. I remember looking with my dad, furiously searching forums on the internet to try to, we were going to crack this code before the writers told us what it was. And that was, when we started investigating stuff, was kind of the defining moment for me.
yeah, like I said, my primary fandom is Sherlock, so I think the idea of investigation comes out being kind of important. And my investigations for the fandom started, like many of our fandom lives do, with Tumblr. So getting to Tumblr and realizing that there is an entire universe of other people who are just as excited about this as I am was a huge conversion moment in terms of becoming a fan. And it was really neat because Sherlock, as some of you guys know, and if you don't, I'm going to tell you, is obscenely detailed. There are details from the original stories that show up that are simply ridiculous. And the desire to seek out more knowledge of the stories so that I could understand the show better was a big part of me becoming not just a fan, but a person who could contribute to discussions and to offer new information. And I think that discovery that I could contribute that was pretty much what flipped the switch and made me an official fandom member.
Yeah, it is interesting how a lot of these questions are going to go together, because I think my definition of fan probably is different from some of these. Because I think I really was a fan of Kurt Vonnegut from the very first book that I read of his, to tell you the truth. Like, I remember reading it. It was actually one of his worst books, interestingly enough, which is very interesting to me, and I think I have a fondness for some of his bad books because of that. But it was Jedi Gift was the book, and I remember reading it and just thinking, wow, there's something, and this ties into a later question too, there's just something that he sees about the world that like resonates with what I see about the world. And it was like really, it was like finding a friend, like seriously. It was like finding like, yeah, I mean somebody that kind of got it the way that I got it. So yeah, I would definitely say the first book, because I remember after I read that thinking, what else did he write? You know, and I remember like finding all the, you know, canon, and then it kind of went from there, all the other stuff, all the ancillary material, and it was just, you know, it was out of control at one point, but it's definitely way back down now. But yeah, I think definitely my first book. But again, that goes into a lot of the questions of how you define fan.
There was two things that I was going to say about that. The first one, I had a very similar experience with Dr. Baggett when I first encountered the writings of Rushdie. He's a very comic author, very funny author, and from the area of the world, he's from India originally. I lived in Iran for a year when I was very young. And so there's a connection there, obviously, but I remember something that C.S. Lewis had written in Surprised by Joy, when he said while he was still an atheist, he encountered the writings of G.K. Chesterton, I believe, and he said it was almost like a meeting of the minds. He says, I almost felt like I was a friend with another person's mind, even though his worldview was totally antithetical to my own. And if you know anything about Rushdie, his worldview, in many ways, is antithetical to my own. He's atheistic. He was born in a secular Muslim family, and yet something that he sees of the world, I really resonated with, probably in the ways that Dr. Baggett did, and I really wanted to connect and accumulate some of that insight. You know.
Can I just add?
Yeah, sure.
I have a quote in here, and I love this quote. And there's actually two quotes, but I'm going to stick with one. But this, I think, captures what you were saying and what I was saying. It's from The History Boys, which is a play by Alan Bennett, and it's amazing. I just love this. I love the play, but I love this particular passage. But one of the English professors or teachers there, he says that the best moments in reading are when you come across reading, and it probably applies to all of these things, or when you come across something, a thought, a feeling, a way of looking at things, which you had thought special and particular to you. Now here it is, set down by someone else, a person you have never met, someone even who is long dead. And it is as if a hand has come out and taken yours. And I love that, and it just reminds me sort of my experience reading Vonnegut.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. What Caitlin and Corey were saying too about Lost and about Sherlock, it's interesting that both of those are mysteries kind of that you felt personally connected to, desire to solve. I don't know if you ever saw the movie before. It came out, I think, in the early 2000s, called Donnie Darko. Donnie Darko with Jake Gyllenhaal and Jenna Malone. When it came out, there was a lot of mystery behind it, and I remember that there were websites created to try to explain it. And I was sort of I felt personally connected to it. I'm like, what does this mean? Like the double rainbow guy, right? And I wanted to I almost wanted to dig in because the mystery called to me, right? So let's talk a little bit more about the personal aspects of fandom. When fans talk about their passions, when we as fans talk about what we appreciate, there seems to be that deeply personal aspect to fandom, to the worlds that fandom creates. What do you guys find in your own experience that makes this fandom or the accumulation of connections, fan connections, so personal or deeply personal for you?
I'll start.
It's obviously you're passionate about it, right? Yeah, Andy?
I think the word passion and appreciate may not necessarily be the right words to use when discussing fandom, because it's about what we love. And there's nothing more personal than what we love. James K. Smith talks about, we are lovers before we are believers of anything. And I think, I don't know, it speaks more to what we love than what we like. I mean, like I can admire the technical craft in an Ionesco play. Oh, a rhinoceros, but I don't love it. I'm not a fan of it. But I love Batman comics. I read 4 this morning waiting for this panel. I read 4 yesterday on my way to and through an airport. Like, I love Batman. I love Batman stories. I love the character. I love everything about it. And it's the difference between, Ionesco's a master of craft versus like, Batman is just a part of my life that I love and I don't want to get rid of.
I think for me and for a lot of people that I've spoken to about what they are fans of, and Dr. Baggett kind of echoed some of this, I think for a lot of us there's a very familial connection between who we are and what we are a fan of. It's almost for a lot of us, I found Lost when I was about 14 years old. A lot of us, liking Batman, Star Wars, whatever, from the age of like a child. It's almost as if the thing we're a fan of has raised us. And I think that there's a very protective identity sort of situation happening there. Like you would be protective of a parent, or you would be protective of a family member. And I think that that's why there's such a strong personal connection for so many of us, because it's been with us since childhood or our young adult formative years.
Kind of going along with that, I think especially for those of us who choose our fandoms or have our fandoms choose us later in life, right? The fandom chooses the fangirl.
I didn't choose the fandom life chose me.
Right, exactly. Those of us who encounter our fandoms later in life, I think a lot of times there's a sense in which, sort of like what you were saying about Vonnegut, we feel very strongly connected with it because we see ourselves in the fandom in some way. So for Harry Potter, you have your house, right? Hashtag Ravenclaw.
So the pride.
So you have your house. For other fandoms, if you're in the Hunger Games, you have probably a character that you especially like or a district that you identify with. If there are any Twilight fans here, I guess there might be. You might have a character that you particularly feel affinity for.
Team Jacob.
Team Edward for the win, guys.
But that's the thing, right?
I'm just saying.
So for me, I think Sherlock was a big thing because I felt strongly for the character. I felt identified with the character and identified with a lot of the things going on with his life, and it made me want to know more, and then you get sort of that protective familial connection after you've made that initial contact.
For sure.
Dr. Stotzlayer?
Yeah, I have something about that, yeah. So I see a lot of children's lit students in here. I'm very happy that you guys came. And we've been talking a lot in children's literature about, so there's an article from 1990 by Rodine Sims Bishop who talked about how children need to both see themselves as in a mirror in children's literature, but they also need to see into other people's lives through a window. And this is almost essentially what Corey just said, but I think I've noticed that a lot of fandoms that people tend to get very passionate about are stories that have a lot of characters in them. Harry Potter, Star Wars are two that immediately come to my mind, or even the Avengers or something like that. Because even if you don't identify with the main character, there's going to be somebody in there that you can latch onto because there's just so many characters and they represent so many different things. We're going to talk about fan fiction later, I think, but I think that's one of the big, that's the big impetus behind fan fiction is to write the story from maybe a minor character's perspective. So for me, that was, and also it's such a fully, talking about Harry Potter, such a fully realized world. I feel like I could go there. I can imagine myself as a student at Hogwarts, just an average student who was going there when Harry was going there, and I haven't imagined myself as that before. So I think that's part of it too. It feels like an actual world that you could go to. So yeah.
And I would just add that for me personally, I would also say that I'm also passionate in the way that I want to share. And I feel like that's with fan fiction. You want to share what you've learned or gained from your fandom. and I know everyone that knows me, I have shared plenty about Buffy and stuff like that. So that I would say also adds to just the passion that you have. You want to bring that to another person's life, what you've gained from it.
The last few things that were said totally helped me springboard to my next question. Because reading, watching sports on TV, sometimes they're seen as very solitary activities. But I noticed that as our panelists have been saying things, there's been a lot of resonation with a lot of you, like, yeah, me too, me too. And some of you guys I thought were going to jump up and storm the stage. And it was very passionate, right? So the question is, can you be a fan of something or somebody or a work of literature or art without being part of a community? What do you guys think about that?
I would say yes.
Wrong. No, I'm just kidding. You're good. You're good. Keep going.
I would say yes. I would say that there's like different levels of fan, I would say.
Yep.
To be just a fan of something, you like something, you like to read it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you want to join discussions or you want to go to a Comic-Con or you want to write or read fan fiction. But that doesn't mean that you don't not like something. You do enjoy reading it, you just don't want to participate in it maybe.
Okay. Have you, let me just follow up real quick, Courtney. So since you love Buffy so much, whenever you've encountered, I know your profile picture on Facebook, right? I know about this, we're friends on Facebook, right? So what, who are you in the picture with in your profile picture?
The actor that plays Spike.
James Marsters for the
James
win.
Marsters.
And where did you take that picture? Is that photoshopped or was that real?
Comic-Con.
Comic-Con.
WizardCon, it was in Roanoke.
Okay, so when you encountered other fans of Buffy, was it sort of intoxicating for you a little bit, or exciting?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I was in line and I was just chatting people.
Yeah.
We were talking about what we'd seen in it.
Right.
And so it was amazing. It was
Very
a great
cool.
experience.
Okay, that's all I gotta say about that. All right, other things, other thoughts? Can you be a fan without being part of a community?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. I think today it would be very hard to be a fan and not at least be aware of the conversation that's happening around your particular text, even if you never, I don't go on a lot of, online fandom overwhelms me, so I don't really read Harry Potter fan fiction, and I go on Pottermore, because that's like filtered through J.K. Rowling, but there's just too much out there, it's information overload, but I'm aware of fan theories and conversations that people are having about Harry Potter. I actually did go to a Harry Potter convention a few years ago. It was formerly called LeakyCon, now it's called GeekyCon, and they actually do have a lot of other fandoms represented there. My mom and I went, we were actually kind of annoyed by all of the Harry Potter fans there, so I think it's a personality thing. We are also older than most of the people at LeakyCon. But anyway, it's nice to know that there are other people who love what you love, even if I may not like them all individually. It's nice to know that I'm not the only one. So yeah, I think there's at least a sense of the community that you're part of, even if you don't participate actively in it, that is necessary to be a fan.
And there are some texts that do not have a fandom. There's a series of novels that I love, that I'm a huge fan of, that the fandom is incredibly small. They're plucky and they're passionate and they're vocal, but they're small. And there's other stuff that I'm a fan of that do not have any fans at all. I'm sure there is a Dracula fandom out there. I haven't looked. I don't really want to because it's awkward. But I love that it's my favorite book, but I just haven't looked for any fandom, and I'm cool with not being part of that particular fandom for a variety of reasons.
And that's a super interesting point, loving something so much but not wanting to be part of the fandom for it. So that's why I'm kind of answering the questions under the Lost sort of thing, because I participated in that fandom and participated when the show was running. But when we were initially going through all of this, I was thinking, well, I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, but I don't actively participate in discussions and theories, because I think trying to dissect Tolkien in some ways is a bit above my pay grade. So I'm not trying to get into that. But
Can I interrupt here for a second?
Yeah.
Remember when the first Lord of the Rings movies came out in the early 2000s?
I do.
Did you celebrate and participate in some of the activities of people going to the midnight premiere dressed as hobbits or wizards, or did you mock those kind of things?
Okay, so here's the thing. I was 6th grade when that came out, and I had planned a very elaborate elf costume.
Really?
I went onto the dark ages of the internet and was looking for a place to buy elf ears, and I was I'm gonna dress up and I'm gonna be the coolest kid, and then I got nervous and didn't do it. So the spirit was willing. So Yeah,
But the prosthetics were weak.
they were. And from China, so.
Yeah.
Weak and expensive.
Very good.
So yeah, that.
Sorry, I'm just gonna real quick and then we can move on. I think there's a difference between being a fan and being a fangirl.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you can be a fan, or a fanboy, excuse me. You can like a thing and read the thing or watch the thing or be interested in the thing and be a fan in that way, but you're not really part of the fandom community until you have participated in some way. Even if that just means like going on Tumblr and reblogging stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My answer probably does go back to both my initial kind of attraction to Vonnegut, but also the nature of Vonnegut itself, because there's no kind of real developed, group. I mean, I connect with other Vonnegut fans, through just presenting at conferences or just sharing my interest in classes and things like that. So, I do make those connections, but it just isn't as organized. But I think because of that, just because of the nature of both of those things, I do think you can be a fan. So, there is still that kind of wanting to, do something, that participatory nature, but I guess the particular individual objects of fandom will kind of dictate the terms of that, and I guess the individual person too, because I absolutely love, and it just actually happened last week, I think, when people share things that, I saw this Vonnegut thing and it reminded me of you. Somebody shared that on my Facebook page last week, and it happens all the time because people know that I love Vonnegut, and I'm often the Vonnegut evangelist, the person who has sort of introduced them to Vonnegut, kind of sharing, and that's sort of what I feel like my role is, in a way, with my interest and appreciation of his work, to kind of communicate, here are things that you might like, about him, so.
We've talked a lot about the participatory or communal aspects of fandom, and you think about this idea of coming together to sort of share in the passion, share in the love for something. I know that I talk in my classes a lot about how in our particular age, our current age, 2017 America, there's a great emphasis placed, particularly millennials and I guess it's called Gen Y or Gen I now, or whatever, on authenticity, right? Being authentically yourself, being clear and genuine and all that. Let's talk now, or move away from this idea of community as like togetherness and celebrating together. Is there ever any time conflict within a fandom community?
I'll start.
Another way of putting this is, have you ever experienced internal policing in fandom? Like, who's the real fan, or who's the authentic fan? Drawing lines over who's that authentic fan, qualifications for what makes a true fan. Who wants to go?
I'll go first.
Andy, go ahead.
Okay.
There's actually a term for this, and it's called gatekeeper fans. And this comes up a lot especially like for me, especially in comics. Usually directed at the fairer sex by guys usually. People say, like for example, the Wonder Woman movie just came out, and it was spectacular, absolutely fantastic, absolutely fantastic. To quote Eccleston, and. So a lot of like comic sales for Wonder Woman comics skyrocketed, and great because they're all fantastic and wonderful. Pun totally not intended. I hate myself for saying that. But
I just got it.
but I mean, there are people who will say, "Oh, you're reading a comic just because the movie came out," or "You're reading Suicide Squad comics because the movie just came out." That like, you're not a real fan because you haven't read these, 100 or so Wonder Woman stories or Suicide Squad stories.
Do we see that at all too? For any Tolkien fans in the crowd? Tolkien.
You just like the movies?
Right, the movies or the book, but what about the Silmarillion?
I have personal
You read
experience. I have personal experience
Yes.
with being gatekept.
With Tolkien?
No.
So no, when we were planning this, because I love Lord of the Rings, and I didn't read the books as a kid or anything. I didn't grow up on them. My first acquaintance with the franchise was the films. So that's it was my first love as far as Lord of the Rings is concerned. So we're planning all of this, and I end up admitting in one of the planning meetings that I actually have not read all 3 of the Lord of the Rings books. And there's a gasp.
Yeah, there's a gasp.
Because apparently that makes me terrible.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's real. I'm not allowed to carry the card
And if
until I
you're a
finish
real-
Return of the King.
And if you're a real Tolkien fan, you hate the fact that Peter Jackson didn't include Tom Bombadil.
Yes.
Tom
absolutely.
Bombadil is the worst. I don't like him.
Shame on you. Shame on you.
See,
My opinion is valid.
Okay, other thoughts.
I think for a lot of fans, again, I'm going to go back to the whole online world. Being a true fan has to do with how much you know. So if you're entering the Sherlock fandom and you don't know what John Locke is, you're not a true fan. It's very upsetting, I know. So if you're not acquainted with some of the basic ships, if you don't know the tropes of the fandom, if you don't know what's expected, if you're not familiar with some of the basic details, you better not contribute anything until you are.
Yeah.
Because you might not be considered a true fan by people who do have more knowledge than you do.
Not their division.
Exactly, it's not their division.
It took me a minute, but I got it.
Anyone else on this end have thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, I just
Ah,
thought of
thanks.
something.
I'll work
Yes.
with them after this.
Yes, because that just made me think there's a difference between knowing the original text really well and knowing the fandom really well, because I've seen all the episodes of Sherlock, but I don't know what you're talking about right now. And that's a bad example, because I've only seen the episodes once, but like, I think there are probably, even though I said I have a pretty good I'm pretty conversant with the conversation around Harry Potter, I know if I haven't gone down the rabbit hole of like Draco Harry shipping and all that kind of stuff.
Hermione.
And yeah, so I'm just saying, yeah, I know the original text really well. You do not want to play me in Harry Potter trivia, but yeah, but I may not be, even though I love Harry Potter, I may not be there are probably Harry Potter fans out there who would scoff at me for not knowing a lot of the fandom lingo and stuff. So wow, yeah, that's interesting.
That reminded me of something. It's totally not on my questions, but we haven't talked yet about music, right? A lot of people are fans of certain kind of music. What do you do to demonstrate, not just for the panels, for you guys, that you're fans of a particular music group or a particular type of music? Yeah, Ashley. Yes, exactly. Or donate blood or plasma or something like that, right? In order to pay for concert tickets. Yeah.
I spend a crap load of money wearing like band T-shirts.
Okay, band T-shirts.
And
You're a true fan.
And I wear them in places where people will see them, so that they
Yes.
can come up to me and be like, "Yo, like your shirt." Like,
That's amazing.
Hey.
Right. Okay. Anything else that demonstrates that you are one of the gatekeepers? Yeah, Emily. Yeah. For which professor? Okay, cool. And what else?
Whenever one of the songs comes on the radio or someone mentions it, you immediately burst out into all of the lyrics,
Absolutely.
no hesitation.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Just all out there.
Yes.
Back and vocals.
Yeah, back and vocals there.
Occasionally do that even without the music problem.
Yes. How many of you have ever demonstrated your snobbishness, though, by knowing some of the more obscure songs that the musician or the group has created, and you can sing along to those, and you know the piece of. There was a movie that came out. I keep talking about movies. Sorry, Professor Olson. You'll love this, right? So, do you remember Professor Olson, the John Cusack movie High Fidelity?
Yes.
Remember High Fidelity? It's
Yes.
based on a novel by who am I thinking of?
Right?
Nick Hornby,
Yeah.
exactly. So the character played by Jack Black is something of a music snob. They own a record store, and the more obscure, right, the better, the more eclectic, the better. So some guy comes in, and he wants to buy a record for his daughter for her birthday, and he's like, what are you looking for exactly? And they've got to do the coolest, the most kind of alternative stuff, and he's like, I'm looking for Stevie Wonder's I Just Called to Say I Love You, and he's like, get out of here! Right? Basically, like, shoves him out. He's like, I don't even want to take your money because you're so lame. Because you like all the really, the stuff that's so basic and so obvious. All right. Anyway, let's get back into our material so we can talk about music for a while, too. Dr. Stockslager was talking about fan fiction, right?
Oh,
Fan fiction, which is very participatory. Why do people who are fans of a particular genre or type of music or a particular sports team or author, why do they enjoy that kind of speculative activity? Why do you enjoy that kind of speculative activity, like developing fan theories, writing what-if fan fiction? What's the allure? What's the appeal there? Haley.
I think like Dr. Stockslager was saying, she can imagine herself at Hogwarts. And so I think it's kind of furthering, I'll let her speak to that more specifically, but furthering that idea that like you can place yourself in the world of what you're a fan of. I do think that is maybe fandom specific, depending, because I mean, We talked about Hunger Games, but I don't know who would want to be in the Hunger Games. So, and I most certainly would not want to
No one would
necessarily
volunteer
place
as tribute
myself
for
on the
that?
island in Lost.
Right.
Because that does not sound like a fun time. So I think it depends on the universe, and it depends on how expansive it is. But yeah, this idea that we can like almost craft our own personal narrative in that world, I think is important as far as identity is concerned.
Okay.
I think writing fan fiction can also sort of give you like fan cred.
Mhm.
You know, like if you've written fan fiction for a fandom, you are a more serious member of that fandom.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some fan fictions that have actually become like cornerstones of the fandom world.
Mhm.
Like if you've read My Immortal, you're like a
Oh,
true
God.
fandom person.
Oh,
I don't
Lord.
recommend it, it's terrible. But
It's-
if you
it is, it's
have,
awful.
then
Hear about the author.
you can talk about
It's a
that.
bestseller now.
Isn't that horrible?
Yeah.
But there are fan fiction that has become so serious and like so well considered within the fandom community, not My Immortal, but other fan fiction,
Jumping off.
that it's almost canon,
Mm.
right? Like we're all aware of it in the same way.
Yeah.
Another example would be 50 Shades of Grey, was Twilight fanfiction.
It
It's
was.
now a trilogy of movies that are making at least some money, I guess. Somebody's buying
some
tickets for
money.
those.
Some amount of money for that.
Oh, good.
I also know that a lot of people write fan fiction deliberately to be transgressive, either
Mhm.
to
Yes.
disagree with something that the author said or the original
gonna
creator or
fix it.
whatever, and fix it, something they disagree with. Or I think, like I said, going back to representation, a lot of people want, like Harry Potter is a pretty white and almost exclusively heterosexual world, and so a lot of people have written Harry Potter fan fiction to represent people that aren't represented.
And to kind of going back to the street cred idea that Corey brought up, I think that not only are you demonstrating street cred like because of the level of participation, you're demonstrating street cred for your fandom because you know Harry Potter so well that you can write in the voice of Hermione, or you know these characters so well that you can like or accurately predict what actions they're going to take, and I think that's when those ones become cornerstones. I know in the Star Wars universe, it's a bit complicated for Star Wars because there was a whole expanded universe that's now been relegated to technically fan fiction. But as far as, and I might be wrong here, as far as I was aware with the novelizations, there seemed to be like approved authors who got to like hold the mantle of being Star Wars expanded universe authors. And they're, like, though it was technically, I guess, fan fiction, even though it was considered canon at the time, they had, like, gained the authority to be able to, publish on behalf of the franchise, which some random person writing a story on their blog doesn't have.
Right.
So.
Good. Okay, so let me do a follow-up question to that also, and let's get into a little bit of literary theory. Boo. Right. Talk about this whole idea of authorial intent versus reader response, that kind of idea. So when we talk about fan fiction, it seems to be very empowering. You're an individual who actually is creating your own world based off of, you're almost a sub-creator, right? The world of the author himself. Is it possible for a fan of a work to know the work's characters better even than J.K. Rowling himself or herself, Tolkien? Does a fan ever have the authority to claim the author wrote something out of character, inconsistent with a particular character's past actions? Here's what I'm thinking of when I thought about that question. I'm thinking about the recent hoopla and the controversy over Harper Lee's new book, right? Came out, Ghost of Watchmen, where a lot of people who were big fans of the first one, Kill a Mockingbird, said that the character of Atticus Finch wasn't necessarily consistent with the character that they knew and loved so much from To Kill a Mockingbird. You guys get my question that I'm asking? Is who wants to tackle this one first?
The authorial intent person is right there.
I mean, I have something to. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so with Lost, I don't know if any of y'all ever watched Lost. Thank you. One nod in the back. I see you.
No, couple
This
others.
is like
I
church.
see
I
those
appreciate
hands.
it. All right.
I see those
So,
hands.
I am under no illusions that the writers of Lost in season 1, episode 1 knew where they were going by the end of season 6. I do not think that is a true statement. So I am very comfortable saying y'all were just trying here. And I think in television, it's a little easier because you have a writer's room, you have multiple writers pitching in. So I think depending who's on for that episode, even though there are directors and like overseers to the creative process, it's a bit easier to say, well, like that's jumping the shark. That's logically inconsistent with where we've been for the past 3 seasons. I think for a novel with one single, I guess you can almost say godlike creator of the universe, that becomes a little more difficult.
Okay.
To like assert your authority as a fan, saying Rowling or Tolkien or whoever got it wrong.
Yeah, so do you think in some senses when you watch Lost and loved it, thinking back to the directors, you know, creating the first episode, first season or whatever, now that you've seen the entire series, do you feel like you are equipped to impose a meaning, let's say, on what's happening in the first, that supersedes or is superior to what the director might have had in mind?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that there's meaning to be had, and I think that there's like retconning that's been done.
What's it?
The term retconning, where you retroactively make something canon based on like.
Oh, I knew that. I just
Okay.
want to make sure that they knew that.
Okay. Were you so like when midichlorians were introduced in the Star Wars prequels and we had to like think about our lives forever. So, I think definitely by the end of season 6 in Lost, they got us to a place where we could say, okay, I see how all of this connects, at least for me. I know for a lot of other people, they were very displeased. So yeah, I do think that I, as a fan, could create meaning where there probably was not meaning intended to be at the beginning.
Okay, other thoughts?
I wrote my doctoral dissertation about this, but that doesn't mean that I can still talk about it intelligently, so I'll try. And I'll try not to go on for 10 minutes either. But I think, well, in my dissertation, I basically said that both, I think this is a helpful concept. J.K. Rowling and Charles Dickens were both like the ultimate fan of their own work. And I don't mean that in an arrogant sort of way. It's just that they loved those characters so much and that they never wanted to get out of it. And so that's why Dickens started doing like his public readings, and that's why J.K. Rowling is still doing Pottermore and writing so many. She's basically writing, Pottermore is like fan fiction that J.K. Rowling writes, essentially. So I don't think that any fan of a work where the author put so much of themselves into it and so much time into it has a right to say, I know this story better than you do, and make a blanket statement like that. However, I do think that it's fine for, like, you know, if you do happen to come across a character that's a little off, and you know, everybody makes mistakes. So I think if we actually get to it, there's a question on there about can fans be good critics, and I think yes, I think this is an instance of just a fan being a critic. Like if I think that, you know, like if I think that J.K. Rowling is wrong when she said that Ron and Hermione shouldn't have gotten married, which I do think she's wrong about. I can point to that and say, you know, I think you're making a mistake there about that one thing, and I think that's part of being a critic, because I can point to evidence in the text, her own text, that she's wrong about. But I don't think, that's not to say that her authority is undermined or that she's thought less about it than I have. It's just that's me reading her text really carefully and pointing out something about it.
And maybe meaning that you as a fan are in kind of a conversation with her as the author and sort of interjecting in some ways.
Right, yeah, it's, again, I think she's still the one with she's the author.
Right.
But
she has power of veto.
She has power of veto, but that just made me think of Vito Corleone.
We need to pass the mic.
I could add that, like, because I completely agree with that, but I would say that fans do tend to have the ability to change the author's mind every once in a while. I know that happened in the Buffyverse. So, I mean, I've had experience with that.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's a two-way street. It's not just a one-way exchange. Good.
I just had one little.
Yeah, sure.
On the topic of, I guess if we can go in the directions of fans literally directly interacting with authors and changing their minds, I am new to this fandom. I'm getting into it. The podcast, The Adventure Zone. Yay! We're friends now. Okay. So, for those of you who do not know, it is a narrative podcast that is loosely based on Dungeons and Dragons. So it's like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that play together. It's very funny. All of the four guys it's 3 brothers and their dad. are all very active on Twitter. And there has been, like, recently this summer, there were conversations about, you know, potential, like, racism or sexism implicit in the show that maybe, like, was not intended. And there were not allegations that you guys are racist and sexist. It was, hey, fans were tweeting at them, this is how this is coming across. We know that you guys are not, like, really bigoted in this way. Like, can you do better? And then that caused them to, like, release a statement and apologize and change and clarify things. So I do think you're right. Fans definitely have, especially when they converge en masse and the fandom is of similar mind on certain issues, the power to change creators, especially now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I wonder if it happens much more regularly now in this interconnected world of social media where authors can interact with their fans much more than, let's say, back before Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are we talking about that now?
Yeah, do you still have that thought on that? Or do you
I have thought on fans influencing the author.
Go ahead.
Okay, I have two examples. Number one, all the way back in the 1890s, Arthur Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes. Pushed him over a waterfall. He was supposed to die forever. I don't know if you guys know this, but Arthur Conan Doyle hated Sherlock Holmes. Hated him so much, wanted him to die and never come back. Because Doyle wanted to do serious writing, historical writing, wartime writing, science fiction. He didn't want to do Sherlock Holmes anymore. 8 years later, he was still getting angry fan mail about how much people wanted Sherlock Holmes back. So he brought the character back in the story The Empty House. So there has been lots of historical examples of fandom back then influencing the author. The other one is a supernatural one, and it's sort of a small one, but the running joke about how much Dean loves pie, that was not supposed to be a running joke. The first time it appeared, people just thought it was funny. There was a lot of posts about it on the internet, so the writers were like, hey, let's keep bringing it back. 12 seasons later, we're still talking about it.
Before I ask the next question, I just happen to remember, this is apropos of nothing, but I'm a big fan of Stranger Things.
Woo!
You know that that's coming out again? Right?
October 27th. October 27th.
Got a t-shirt, a Stranger Things t-shirt. So that's cool, but with the upside down and all that. Cool. All right, next question. As I said, that was apropos of nothing. So the next question is, can fans, and this connects with what Dr. Stockslager was saying just a few moments ago, can fans be dispassionate, detached, good critics in the academic sense, or are they so immersed in the world that they just can't pull themselves away and actually critique what it is that they're reading academically? What do you guys think? Oh.
I definitely say yes, because I think that my academic work is very much part and parcel of my fandom. I think it's hard to divide those two. I wrote my master's thesis on Vonnegut. I wrote a chapter on my dissertation on Vonnegut. I've done a lot of papers on Vonnegut and taught class on Vonnegut, and I've taught books in classes. But it very much is connected to my appreciation of them on a very personal level. And so I think that, the fact that I'm getting these approved by presentations and, paper and things like that, it's being validated that it actually does have something to contribute to both to the academic world, but I think also to just fandom too. So.
I just want to take a small issue with the way the question was asked, Dr. Bell, because I don't think that you have to be dispassionate and detached in order to be a critic. And I think that actually fans, if you love a text, and I'm using text broadly, it could be a TV show, whatever. If you love a text very much, you're going to know it really well, and you need to know a text really well in order to be a critic. And so you're going to be able to handle it. It can be harder to not have blind spots, for example, but I think actually for me, loving something really a lot has made me want to study it more and talk about it more and produce. I have written a scholarly article on Harry Potter as well, so I think you can be both.
Now, as following to what Dr. Baggett and Dr. Stockslager said, do you ever get so passionately invested with the material that when somebody maybe confronts you or challenges you on your critical opinion, you get almost prickly about it? You're like, no,
they're just wrong. They're wrong.
I will fight you over my opinion about the series finale of Lost. It is good.
Yes, it is.
And everyone hates it. And I'm very passionate about that. I know that it's not that good, but also it's good.
So can you countenance criticism if someone were to say, okay, here are the 5 reasons why I think
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot about the direction that the show Lost went that, again, was not the way that the creators intended season 1, that I think for a lot of people the show got too complicated too quickly, and it became too much for, in their view, the writers to handle. And so that's a common criticism. I think I just love the show so much that I'm kind of 2 minds. 1, I think that the ending was a brilliant wrap-up, and 2, I kind of also recognize that it was sort of the best that they could do given the circumstances, given the kind of trajectory that they had set themselves upon. So I'm definitely capable of, especially years removed since the show ended a while ago, capable of separating my affection with, like, understanding from a form of television perspective, hey, maybe this isn't the best TV necessarily, as far as something that would have been, like, super planned out.
Yeah.
He has something, but can I just
really
quick? Vonnegut is such that people either, like, really are drawn to him or really can't stand him. So I am completely fine with knowing why I appreciate him, and I can understand why he's not for everybody. So I think that, and also the academic thing, of course you have to read so much, about that author, so you have a lot of understanding of sort of the different takes. So I think that helps a lot.
For sure.
Speaking from a really practical perspective, just admit your biases up front, like any good scholar would, be intellectually honest that way, saying, I'm a fan of you wouldn't say I because it's an academic paper. I'm a fan of this thing, but that doesn't mean that my enthusiasm is blind, or that I fail to see the flaws in it. Just like being just honest enough to say, I love this thing, and that's why I'm invested. Like I wrote my master's thesis on Batman comics and Joseph Campbell, and I love both of those things, the thing and the person. And I had to say up front, this is not simply a fan writing about his passion. This is a conversation that needs to happen because it hasn't happened yet. So just being intellectually honest, I would say.
I just want to mention the name of a scholar really quick that some of you might be interested in his blog. Henry Jenkins is one of the scholars who wrote about fandom first. He was a media scholar, he is a media scholar, but he started really studying this phenomenon in the 1980s, and he was the first person to really be positive about fandom. Before that, a lot of scholars were saying, fans are just these mindless zombies that are what? We can talk about zombies too, that'd be fun. We're just kind of consuming. And Henry Jenkins wrote this book called Textual Poachers, and he was specifically looking at Star Trek fans. He was talking about how actually fans are active participants. But anyway, he's still active today, and he has this blog called Confessions of an ACA Fan, like an academic fan. And I think that he usually does a lot of interviews and stuff like that on his blog at this point. But I think he's somebody who's shown us that you can, because he loves Star Trek, and yet he is a noted scholar writing about the phenomenon in Star Trek fandom as well.
Great. All right, I have one last question because we're rapidly drawing to a close. So the question is, from a Christian worldview standpoint, since we're here at Liberty University, we want to do that faith integration and everything. How does being a Christian shape your fan participation? Is there anything potentially like sinful or dangerous or to be avoided about excessive fandom, as it were? All right, who wants to start us off?
I'll start with this one because I have kind of like a heartwarming, touchy-feely kind of point of view on this, and then some other people can be critical after that. But when I think of fandom, I think about belonging. I think about people who, and maybe this is some of you, growing up you felt like you didn't really fit in with any particular group, and then you discovered your people through your fandom. And I love that. I think that is beautiful, and I know that I'm able to be objective and see that there's negative sides to identifying too much with a particular group and find your identity there instead of in Christ. I get that. But I do think that idea, and I especially think of it with children and teenagers, and we talk about sometimes in children's lit, just like knowing that you have somebody else who understands you and is like you, it can mean the world. It can literally save somebody's life. So I think that's what's beautiful about fandom. Oh, and tying that to a Christian worldview, I mean, sorry, I didn't really answer that question, but I think as Christians, we want people to find their identity in Christ, certainly, but we also want people to, we want to have compassion on people and like help them, survive. I think, I don't know, I think that fandom can be an act of reaching out, of hospitality, of compassion, of love, so you guys need to stop me. Somebody else say something negative.
I got it.
Yeah, and I would add, for me, my own personal experience, I have, watching Buffy and being a fan of Buffy, I've been able to have conversations with others, especially at that Comic-Con that I went to, and I was able to bring a theological aspect into it, discussing the truths that I've seen inside the show that, I've been watching with a biblical perspective, and I've gained something from that, and that opened the door of discussion with others that they were like, oh, like I've seen that too, and then I kind of am able to, show them a little bit of like my faith through that, which has been a really cool experience.
Yep.
Kind of tying this question back to, some of us have been using sort of evangelistic language in referring to like proselytizing for our fandom, as it were. And I think, as far as Christian worldview is concerned, we talk a lot about, jokes about now like fire and brimstone, street corner preachers, and like not being too like turn or burn when we're talking to people about our faith. But I think that we can get turn or burn when we're talking to people about our fandom. And I'm not going to get too detailed into this because I don't want to start a riot, but there are fandoms that I don't particularly have interest in because of how like involved it seems that to be a fan of.
It's like a cult.
Like Doctor Who is one. Like I can't watch Doctor Who. I cannot do it. I'm sorry. I'm glad you love it.
I understand.
But because it feels like it's such this big thing, and because of how intense the fans are, it feels overwhelming. So I think Christian worldview wise, what that means for us as fans and as people who want others to participate in their fan group, I think that we need to like watch how we advocate and make sure that we're, presenting all things with Christian love, that we're not like, I don't know, being hateful or being exclusive in our attempts to be inclusive.
Okay.
Talking about the negative aspects of fandom, there are many things about fandom that are amazing. We talked about community, we talked about finding your people, all of those things. But if you've ever done any fan fiction reading, interacted on a wider scale with other fans, because human beings are fallen and we are sinful, people can use fandom as an excuse to be extremely gross.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
There's some really foul fan fiction out there. There is some nasty stuff that you don't want to get into on the internet. And that is something, I don't necessarily blame fandom for that. I blame human nature for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it can be a side effect and something that, as Christians, we should be aware of as part of the fandom life, if we are.
Mm-hmm.
And then talking about why, like how Christian worldview should view fandom. I think on the most basic level, we are all people who are interested in stories.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not a fan, you're still interested in stories in some way. And we are so incredibly blessed to serve a God who is very interested in stories being told well.
Mm-hmm.
We have so many examples of God in creation and in the Bible and in other ways telling stories with an incredible amount of meaning and importance and value for people and for the story that's being told. And I think that comes across in the way that we value fandom.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree with John Milton in Areopagitica, which if you haven't read it, you need to read it. It's amazing. He says all truth is God's truth, wherever you get it from.
Mm-hmm.
So if we watch Supernatural and we learn about self-sacrifice and fighting for the right thing, even though the odds are against us, that is still truth. If we read Harry Potter and we learn about friendship and loyalty and understanding what good and evil actually means, that's still truth, no matter where it comes from. So we can still get a lot of value out of our fandoms, even though they're not always the places of great purity that we wish that they were.
Dr. Baggy, do you have any concluding?
Can I just
Yeah,
have a
sure.
minute? I totally agree with everything that Corey just said, and that's basically exactly what I have written here. I do mention Philippians 4:8 in sort of my little response, but that's kind of my guiding principle for just any literary study. Think on the things that are beautiful, lovely, pure, of good report, and obviously this world things are mixed right now. I mean, just the nature of this world, the weeds and wheat grow up together, you know. So you have to separate. There's a discerning process that you have to go through, and I do find this at work in my interaction with Vonnegut's text, with my commentary on it. He is, I don't know, I feel like I need to say this, and this is why I wanted to make a comment, because I do love Vonnegut so much. But he is a self-proclaimed agnostic, and so he very much has this humanist perspective, and he is very vocal about it and puts that very, very clearly forward. But I wrote a piece a few years ago called Vonnegut, Unlikely Apologist, and I think that kind of captures my way of approaching him, and I think it's maybe to brag a little bit. It's one of the favorite things that I've written. But yeah, I mean, it does this, you know, it really says, here is a statement about the dignity of human beings. Here's a statement about good and evil and really believing in that. Here's a statement in all of his works about the need, the desperate need of humanity for salvation and the fact that humanity cannot save itself. And so kind of using the Christian worldview to read these texts and kind of pull out and say, here's a bridge, you know? So I really think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Great. Well, to conclude, just want to say, since this is a panel on fandom, first of all, I'm a big fan of the English department, and I'm a big fan of all of you guys. So thank you for coming. No, please. Thank you for coming, and have a great fall break. Enjoy college with each other before your next